Let me tell you something most men don't hear enough. Your strength is not in your muscles. It's not in your loud voice, your sharp words, or how quickly you can dominate a room. The kind of strength that lasts, the kind that leaves an impression, that earns love, respect, and peace, it comes from maturity. And that's a truth. Too many men miss while they're busy trying to prove they're real men. But here's the thing, you don't need to prove strength. True strength proves itself in how you carry yourself through the difficult, silent, humbling moments of life. You see, life has a way of testing you in silence. It doesn't always hit you with a bang. Sometimes it's the moment your woman pulls away emotionally and you don't know why. Sometimes it's that job that lets you go with no warning, or your friend betraying you when you least expect it. And in that moment, the question isn't how angry you get, it's how you respond with dignity or with destruction. Mature strength is restraint. It's when you could lash out, but you don't. When you could dominate the conversation, but instead you listen. When you want to raise your voice, but you lower your ego instead. That's power most men haven't been taught to admire. They think that real power is about getting control. But the deeper truth, the one I've learned over nearly a century of watching men rise and fall, is this: the man who can control himself will never be controlled by anyone else. And I get it. Many of you were never shown this. Maybe no one told you that vulnerability doesn't make you weak, that apologizing isn't submission, that asking for clarity doesn't mean you're soft. Culture has sold you a version of masculinity that is loud, rigid, and emotionally disconnected. But here's what you need to understand. Women don't stay for that. Children don't feel safe around that. And you, deep inside, don't even feel peace within that. That version of masculinity is a mask, and it's heavy. So let me give you a new definition of strength. Strength is being still in chaos. Strength is saying, I'm hurt, but I won't hurt you back. Strength is pausing before you speak and checking your intention. Strength is learning to sit with discomfort without turning it into destruction. That's the kind of man people trust. That's the kind of man a woman feels safe with. That's the kind of man who doesn't just exist, he leads. One of the biggest lies sold to men is that showing emotion makes you weak. But I've lived long enough to see what really breaks men. It's not emotion, it's emotional ignorance. When you bottle everything up, refuse to talk, and let pride lead you into silence or rage, you're not being strong, you're self-destructing. And worse, you're teaching everyone around you that loving you requires fear, not safety. And trust me, nobody builds a legacy that way. A strong man doesn't run from emotional accountability. He faces it. He owns his faults without shame. He doesn't shrink under pressure. He slows down, evaluates, and then responds with wisdom. That's what earns respect, not demands it. That's the difference between a boy trying to impress and a man who impresses without trying. So if you want to be a man that others remember with honor, not resentment, if you want to be the kind of man a woman respects even in her silence, then stop chasing control, start mastering calm. That's where your power is, not in proving you're a man, but in becoming one. Because in the end, your strength won't be measured by how hard you hit, but by how gently you hold what matters. There's something I wish more men understood early. Women don't need you to be perfect. They need you to be present. That might sound simple, even obvious, but let's go deeper, because presence isn't just about being physically in the same room. It's about emotional attentiveness, mental engagement, spiritual connection. And the truth is, a lot of men don't know how absent they are, even when they're sitting right there. So many men believe they need to impress women with what they have, their money, car, career, muscles, or charm. And while those things might catch her eye, they don't hold her heart. That comes from something far more rare: how you make her feel when you're around. Does she feel heard? Does she feel seen? Does she feel safe, not just physically but emotionally? You can't fake that, and you can't substitute it with gifts, promises, or performance. Here's the psychological truth. Women are wired for emotional depth. It's not about drama, it's about connection. When a woman opens up to you, she's not looking for a fixer, a judge, or a passive nod. She's looking for presence, for you to sit in her discomfort with her, to validate her reality, even when you don't fully understand it. And most men, instead of being present in that moment, retreat. They distract themselves with work, their phones, or silence. But the absence doesn't go unnoticed. She may not always say it, but over time, she feels it. And once she starts feeling emotionally alone, it's only a matter of time before the relationship starts to fade, even if everything else on the outside still looks intact. Presence also requires patience. A lot of men want women to get to the point or move on when they're expressing themselves. But real presence means slowing down. It means stepping out of your world long enough to enter hers. That's maturity. That's empathy. And the irony is, the more present you are, the less she needs to repeat herself. She calms down because she feels heard. And when a woman feels heard, you unlock a deeper kind of trust, the kind that most men never reach. Let's also talk about emotional availability. Many men have been taught to shut down emotionally, to stay strong by staying distant. But here's the paradox. You think emotional distance protects you, but it's actually what keeps you from receiving love in its fullest form. A woman can't love who you're pretending to be. She can only love who you are when you're honest, when you put down the shield, even for a moment. And when she sees that side of you unguarded, unpolished, real, she doesn't lose respect. She gains trust. Because now, you're not just a man, you're her man. So if you've ever found yourself wondering why your relationship feels distant, even though you're still doing all the right things, providing, showing up, checking in, ask yourself, am I present or am I just around? Because there's a world of difference. Presence isn't about perfection. It's about intention. It's about showing up with your full attention, even when you're tired, confused, or emotionally stretched. That effort, that is what she remembers. That is what she holds on to in your absence. That is what makes her feel chosen every single day. In the end, presence is not a gift you give a woman. It's a gift you give yourself. Because when you learn to truly be present, you don't just build connection, you build credibility. You build character. And you build a kind of love that doesn't waver with time. It deepens. Remember this, your presence has power. Use it wisely. Two halves. Silence. It's one of the most misunderstood forces in a man's life. So many young men are taught that if you're not speaking, you're losing. That if you don't dominate the room, someone else will. But let me tell you something that only life and age can teach you. Silence is not weakness. It's wisdom. It's control. It's knowing that not every emotion deserves a reaction, and not every challenge requires your voice. There's a quiet kind of power in choosing not to respond when provoked, not because you're afraid, but because you're beyond the need to prove anything. You see, when a man doesn't know himself, he talks too much. He feels the need to explain, defend, correct, and impress. But the most grounded men, the ones who know their value, rarely compete for attention. They don't perform. They don't rush to speak. They listen first. They observe. Because they know that silence often reveals more than words ever could. In that stillness, they read the energy of a room, the intentions of a person, and the truth behind the noise. Psychologically, silence offers clarity. In the absence of noise, your mind has space to process. You don't react impulsively. You respond intentionally. Think about it. How many arguments escalate simply because someone refused to pause? How many relationships break down because both people were trying to be heard, but no one was trying to understand? That's what silence allows. It creates space for understanding, for choosing a better word, a calmer tone, a wiser perspective. And in relationships, this principle is even more powerful. When a woman is emotional, upset, or expressing herself intensely, the worst thing a man can do is match her volume with his own. That's not strength, that's ego. Real strength is holding your ground without raising your voice. It's listening without interrupting. It's waiting until the storm passes before you speak, not because you're passive, but because you're strategic. Silence is not backing down, it's stepping back to see the whole picture. But let's not confuse silence with suppression. I'm not saying you should bottle things up or avoid important conversations. I'm saying speak less out of emotion and more from intention. Don't just talk to release pressure, talk to create understanding. Your silence is only powerful when it's paired with self-awareness. When you know what you're feeling and why, silence becomes your anchor, not your cage. There's also a philosophical side to this. Life moves fast. People speak without thinking. We live in a world of noise, constant opinions, arguments, distractions. But wisdom whispers. It doesn't compete with chaos. It waits for stillness. And only men who learn to be silent long enough can hear it. This is why the elders, men who have lived, lost, and learned, tend to speak less. Not because they have nothing to say, but because they've learned that most of life's answers aren't found in shouting, but in listening. When you master silence, you master yourself. You begin to notice what others miss. You gain a level of emotional intelligence that many never reach because they're too busy reacting. And the irony is, the more silent you become, the more powerful your words are when you finally choose to speak. Because now, you speak from depth, not from impulse. So remember this, don't fear silence. Cultivate it. Let it sharpen your mind, steady your emotions, and elevate your presence. Because the man who can stay silent in the storm is the man others will turn to when the noise gets too loud. Your voice has value, but your silence, when chosen wisely, has weight. Use both with intention. It's easy to talk about what you want in life. Easy to post it, declare it, dream it out loud. But building it, that's where most men fall off. Because building requires something many aren't taught to value: consistency. Not the flashy kind, not the kind that gets applause, but the quiet, repetitive kind that says, I show up even when no one's watching. That's the kind of man a woman respects. That's the kind of man people trust. Because he's not just chasing moments, he's building something real. Let's be honest. A lot of men think they can impress their way into someone's heart. They believe charm will do what character should. But let me tell you something I've learned watching decades of relationships rise and fall. Charisma may open the door, but character decides whether you stay in the room, and character is built, brick by brick, choice by choice. It's not what you say, it's what you prove through your patterns. A real man doesn't just boast about his plans, he builds silently until the results speak for him. He doesn't need to declare how loyal he is, he just shows up every day with integrity. And the more you build yourself emotionally, financially, spiritually, the less you need to prove anything. Your presence becomes your power. Your discipline becomes your confidence. Your life becomes the evidence. And this isn't just about women. It's about who you become when no one is clapping. Because let's be real, there will be times when no one notices the work you're doing. No validation, no recognition. That's where most men get discouraged. But those quiet seasons, that's when you're truly being shaped. That's when you decide whether you're building for applause or for legacy. Because men who build for legacy understand this. The work isn't always seen, but the results are undeniable. Here's what makes building powerful. It creates security. Not just financial, but emotional. When you're grounded in who you are, when you've built routines that support your growth, when your decisions are guided by principle and not just impulse, people feel it, especially women. She may not articulate it, but she senses it. Your consistency, your structure, your reliability. And trust me, no woman wants to build her life with a man who's still building castles in the air. She wants a man who's built a foundation within himself first. Now, let's flip the script. You might think building yourself means isolation, that you have to shut everyone out to focus. But true building isn't about disappearing. It's about becoming so clear about your purpose that distractions lose their appeal. You stop chasing temporary validation because you're creating something permanent. That's when you stop needing to post every move. That's when you stop begging for love because you realize you are the prize, and not because someone told you so, but because you built yourself to be one. Men who build don't just chase women, they attract quality. They don't just hustle, they move with purpose. And here's the most beautiful part. When you focus on building the man you want to be, the relationships, opportunities, and peace you once begged for start to find you. So ask yourself this: are you boasting or are you building? Are you chasing attention or are you becoming the kind of man who naturally commands it? Because at the end of the day, the world doesn't need louder men, it needs men of substance. And substance is never loud, it's solid. You don't need to be perfect, just be consistent. Start where you are, build quietly, and let the results speak. Because real men don't just make noise, they make impact. Rejection. It's one of those things that stings no matter how strong you think you are. It's humbling, uncomfortable, and often deeply personal. But here's the part most men never get taught. How you handle rejection doesn't just reflect your emotions, it reveals your identity. Because the way you respond when something or someone doesn't choose you exposes the maturity you've developed or haven't. And sadly, many men take rejection as an attack on their worth, when in reality, it's just a redirection of their path. There's a quiet danger in entitlement, believing that just because you invested time, affection, or effort into someone, they now owe you their loyalty, their body, or their future. That belief is not love, it's control wrapped in ego. And when a man hasn't done the inner work, rejection hits like betrayal, not because she disrespected you, but because you expected her to validate you. That's where the emotional breakdown begins. You've probably seen it. Men lashing out because a woman said no, ghosting her after months of pursuit, insulting her character, or turning cold and dismissive. That's not heartbreak talking. That's unprocessed pride. A healed man doesn't shame a woman for choosing differently. He accepts it with grace, knowing that her choice doesn't diminish his value, it simply doesn't align with it. That's what emotional maturity looks like. From a psychological perspective, rejection activates the same part of the brain as physical pain. It literally hurts, but that pain has a purpose if you let it. It forces you to look inward. Why does this moment feel like a collapse? Why do you feel angry, resentful, small? If you keep tracing it back, you'll often find it's not about the person rejecting you. It's about the part of you that relied on them for validation, identity, or direction. That's the part that needs healing, not hiding. Let's be clear. Being rejected doesn't mean you're inadequate. It means that in this specific moment, for this specific person, the connection wasn't aligned. That's all. But when you internalize it as a failure of your manhood, your instinct becomes to perform, to prove, to punish, and none of that leads to growth. It just leads to patterns where every no feels like war, where every boundary feels like rejection, where every woman who walks away becomes a threat to your pride. And that, my brother, is not strength. It's fragility dressed as masculinity. A man who has mastered rejection doesn't beg to be chosen. He doesn't manipulate to stay relevant. He reflects, he evolves. He thanks the experience and uses it as fuel, not for revenge, but for refinement. Because every no carries a lesson, sometimes about the other person, but often about yourself. What did you ignore? What were you chasing? Were you trying to force something just because you didn't want to feel alone? Rejection will teach you more about yourself than most relationships ever will. It holds up a mirror, and it asks you, who are you when you don't get what you want? Do you crumble? Do you chase? Or do you sit with the discomfort, process it, and rise with more clarity about who you are and what you truly need? So the next time you face rejection, whether from a woman, a job, or a life opportunity, don't reach for reaction. Reach for reflection. Because the man who can lose with grace is already winning. He's not ruled by ego. He's led by growth. And growth, my friend, is always more attractive than perfection. Rejection doesn't break the real man. It builds him. Let it build you. Respect is one of those words that gets thrown around a lot. Men want it, demand it, sometimes even mistake fear for it. But very few understand where it truly comes from. Respect isn't built in the spotlight. It's not something you earn through performance or public praise. Real respect is cultivated in the quiet moments, the moments when no one is watching, The moments where your choices reveal your character, not your charm. You see, there's a misconception, especially among men who feel the pressure to be impressive, that respect is something you can force, that if you talk tough, dress well, or show status, people will fall in line. But here's the truth. Those things might earn attention, even admiration, but not respect. Respect is deeper. It's built when you treat others with dignity, not because you have to, but because it's who you are. It's in how you speak to someone who can do nothing for you, how you handle power when you have it, how you respond when someone's vulnerable in front of you, especially in relationships. Women can spot the difference. A man who only shows kindness when it's convenient isn't trustworthy. A man who only acts patient when eyes are on him isn't consistent. She notices how you treat the waiter, how you handle disagreement, how you speak about your exes. She may never say it directly, but she's watching not your performance, but your patterns. Respect isn't a costume you wear when the setting changes, it's your default mode when nobody's rewarding you for it. When you don't get applause for being honest, but you stay honest anyway. When you don't get points for being loyal, but your loyalty doesn't shift. These are the qualities that leave a lasting imprint, not flashy gestures, but consistent values. And here's where it gets deeper. Self-respect and the respect you receive from others are linked. A man who truly respects himself won't tolerate his own laziness, his own disrespectful behavior, or his own emotional recklessness. He holds himself accountable before the world even has to. That's what creates alignment between who you say you are and who you actually show up as. When that alignment exists, people feel it even if they can't explain it. That's when women trust you without you asking for trust. That's when friends rely on you without questioning your loyalty. You don't have to announce that you're a good man. When you live with integrity behind closed doors, it shows up in your energy. You carry a kind of calm, grounded presence that doesn't need validation. That presence commands respect naturally because it radiates something rare in today's world: authenticity. Now, it's not about being perfect. You're going to mess up. You're going to fall short. We all do. But what defines your level of respect, both self-respect and from others, is what you do after the mistake. Do you own it or do you deflect? Do you apologize with sincerity or do you justify it with ego? These choices matter more than we often realize, because people don't just remember what you did, they remember how you made them feel in the process. So the next time you think about earning respect, don't start with what you say, start with how you live. Ask yourself, who am I when no one is watching? What kind of man am I when I have nothing to gain from being kind, consistent, or disciplined? That's where the foundation is laid. At the end of the day, respect isn't requested. It's reflected. The world mirrors back to you what you model in silence. Let your character speak louder than your words, because that's the kind of man people remember long after the room has gone quiet.